Welcome, everyone. I'm Hannah Smith-Brubaker, and I serve as PASA's Executive Director. Thanks for being a part of PASA's 30th Annual Sustainable Agriculture Conference. This session is Leveraging Agriculture's Best Tools for Climate Mitigation with Dr. Rattan, soil scientist from Ohio State University. We're proud to be joined by the 2020 World Food Prize laureate. Support for this session comes from Ephrata National Bank, an independent community bank that has provided simple and convenient personal and business banking services in Lancaster County and the surrounding area since 1881. Okay, let's get started. Dr. Rattan Lal.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be participant of the PASA Sustainable Agriculture Conference. The topic assigned to me is very pertinent, it's timely, on leveraging agricultural best tools for climate mitigation. This is something that very relevant, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to begin by stating the relationship between healthy soil and life. The soil life nexus has been recognized for a long time. Charles Kellogg of USDA stated essentially all life depends on the soil. There can be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. And to Charles Kellogg's very nice statement, I'd like to add that the rhizosphere, which is the root soil interface at nanoscale, is the only site in the universe where the death is resurrected into life. In fact, death and life are the two sides of the same coin, and the coin happens to be a healthy soil. And this part is very vividly depicted whenever you see a soil with high organic matter content, and such soil has a very nice structure favorable for root growth and penetration, and also providing habitat and energy source for millions of microorganisms, mesoorganisms, and macroorganisms, totaling in weight, live weight, of about 5-ton biomass per hectare. So soil is indeed a living entity. Therefore, to manage it prudently so that the life in soil is not damaged or jeopardized in any way is very critical to containing all the ecosystem services to the maximum possible they can be delivered through a healthy soil. That brings me to the question of soil health. Soil health has been defined by many, in fact, going back to several centuries. One of the most used definition by John Durand for the Soil Science Society of America in 1995. I have updated it, and I'm using my own definition that I published in 2016 as a soil's capacity being a dynamic and biologically active entity within natural managed landscapes to sustain multiple ecosystem services such as net primary production, food and nutritional security, biodiversity, water purification and renewability, carbon sequestration, air quality and atmospheric chemistry, elemental cycling, and many other things for both human and nature. The nature part of soil health is very critical. Human benefits as a component of nature. Human belong to nature. If the nature benefits, humanity benefits. And that's a very important concept that we must recognize. If humans benefit and nature does not, it will not help the humanity in the long run. One other concept, health of soil, plants, animals, human, environment, and the planet is one and indivisible. If the health of soil goes down, it has a domino effect. The health of everything else goes down with it. Therefore, when we talk about food security, nutritional security, ecosystem services, we do and should emphasize socioeconomic and political factors. They are no doubt very important, but we must never forget the environmental and resource management issues. Food security research must consider both, and the idea is to reconcile the need for achieving food and nutrition security with the absolute necessity of restoring and improving the environment. It's not either or, we must have both. Soil organic matter content is very critical to soil health. Soil organic carbon content leads to soil's functionality, as we call it soil quality. And on the other side, it's related to soil health, being a living entity, as I already mentioned, containing almost 5 tons of living biomass. And this is directly related to human health and, of course, the planetary health. That brings me to the next topic of soil organic carbon sequestration, which is the research theme of my center at Ohio State University, the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center. So what is carbon sequestration? It's the process of transferring atmospheric CO2 into the soil of a land unit where the plants are being grown through return of plant residues and other organic solids so that they are stored and retained in the unit where the plants are growing as a part of the soil organic matter that we call humus. And it stays there for a long time. That long time retention in soil is very critical. And that long time could be century or a millennial scale. If it returns back immediately within a few days after it is sequestered through photosynthesis, that's not sequestration. So long term is very critical part. How is soil carbon sequestered? We must think about soil as a bank account. So if you want to increase the bank balance, it's important that your deposition of the money in the bank must exceed the withdrawal from the bank. And in this case, the money happens to be carbon. So if we want to increase the carbon budget in the soil, the carbon deposited into the soil through many practices such as biochar, compost, cover crop, root biomass, above ground crop residue, anything else which is biomass carbon. What you input into the soil must always be more than what is lost from the soil. In most cases, the losses happen by erosion, decomposition, leaching. So we must understand the magnitude of the losses so that our inputs into the soil always exceed the losses. Many times people argue, no, I did everything I could, but my carbon does not go up. Well, it did not go up because it did not exceed the losses. It's exactly like the bank account. If you do not deposit more than what you withdraw, and then if the bank account doesn't increase, then you cannot say it did not happen because I did not add. It will not happen if the input deposition was not more than the losses. Most of the time, in the practices of soil management, which are extractive, the inputs are always less than the losses. Therefore, we lead to depletion of soil carbon, and our objective is to reverse the trend. If we did better agricultural practices so that our inputs are always more than the outputs or more than the losses, in general, restoration of wetland can have a higher rate of carbon sequestration. Establishment of perennial vegetation, that's a forest or prairie, is next best option. Household lawn and gardens, because we add a lot of inputs into that, is generally also very high. No-till agriculture is generally about half a ton of carbon per hectare per year. Rangeland maybe 100 to 300 kilogram per hectare per year because the rangelands are mostly in dry land. So these are approximately the rates, and these rates vary with climate. Climate, especially the wetness and the temperature. So if the climate is cool and humid, such as Ohio, Eastern Midwest, the rate of carbon sequestration is high. If the climates are dry and hot, such as southwestern United States, the rates are low. The low rate may be sometimes zero or even negative, especially if the input is less than the output. And the rate can be maybe 50 to 100 kilogram in dry, hot climate, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and so forth. And the rates can be as much as 1,000 to 1,500 kilogram per hectare in a humid, cool climate. And in between, depending upon soil factors elsewhere. There is a very urgent need to adopting soil-centric approach. The green revolution of the 60s, it was a great thing. I salute those who ushered it. It saved millions and millions of people from starvation, but they were variety based. And the varieties were more effective because they were short statured. So they would not lodge with additional input of fertilizer, pesticides, and irrigation. However, 6 decades later, now, there are some environmental issues that we must address. Therefore, right now, there's a need to have a soil-centric approach rather than a seed-centric approach. The idea is to increase through very careful consideration of how the soil resources must be managed to restore soil health on a continuous basis. Therefore, a prudent strategy would imply making soil and agriculture an integral part of the solution and empowering farmers and land managers to restore degraded soils, afforest the denuded lands, and return some marginal lands back to nature. Returning land back to nature is very important, especially in the context of the pandemic COVID-19 that humanity is facing since more than a year now. We need a buffer between humanity and nature. It's the over encroachment of nature that can lead to situations such as we are in now. Therefore, it would be impossible also to keep global temperature at safe level unless there's a radical transformation in the ways by which we, the human, produce and consume our food and manage the earth's finite and fragile soil resources. We must improve, restore, and manage resources very judiciously. That brings me to the question of regenerative agriculture. What is it? Regenerative agriculture is any technique that restores soil health. More formally, it is something inspired by eco-innovation, powered by non-carbon energy, driven by a circular economy and green infrastructure, and supported by the recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere at the bedrock of sustainable development. Sustainable development. Remember, here I'm referring to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. But this concept of recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere, soil and biota, vegetation, have lost carbon since the beginning of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. We must reverse that trend. We must restore the soil carbon pool. So regenerative agriculture can be a system-based, holistic approach, and a system-based regenerative agriculture reconcile the need for producing adequate and nutritious food with the necessity of restoring the environment, making farming a solution to environmental issues, making farming a solution to environmental issue. That is the point that I repeated again for the emphasis. Agriculture must become a solution to environmental issues. We cannot do without agriculture. We cannot do without farming. We cannot do without food. Therefore, the source of food must be a solution, has to be a solution to the environmental issue. And that's where the soil health comes in as a very critical component. And regenerative agriculture therefore encompasses a wide range of farming and grazing practices. I hear a lot of debate about it. This works, this does not work. The question when it does not work everywhere, because there is no one panacea that can work universally on 300,000 types of known soils. So the local specificity, fine tuning, adaptation is absolutely necessary. Therefore, it's a wide range of practices. All those practices which under site-specific condition can lead to increase in soil carbon stock, not decrease. So it could be any practice that restores soil carbon stock. But recognizing that there is no one size fit all situation, it depends on site-specific condition. Regenerative agriculture comprises system-based conservation agriculture, which includes no-till farming, used in conjunction with residue mulching, cover cropping, integrated nutrient and pest management, complex rotation, and of course, integration of crops with trees and livestock. This last paragraph is very critical. Many times people say, no, it does not work. The idea is not, it does not work. The idea is how to make it work, because we must make agriculture a solution. So making it work is our responsibility. There are several examples of regenerative agriculture. I mentioned conservation agriculture already. That includes many components: no-till, residue mulch, cover cropping, complex rotation, integrated nutrient and pest management, aerobic direct seeded rice rather than puddled transplanted flooded rice, drip irrigation if necessary, livestock, managed grazing, agroforestry, lay farming, silvopastoral system, fodder trees, live fences. That also includes soil health improvement, achieving land degradation neutrality. If we degrade land somewhere within a country or province, state, county, district, we must restore equivalent amount somewhere else. So the net land degradation is zero. Afforestation of denuded hills, wetland restoration, conversion from plow-based to no-till or conservation agriculture system, adoption of conservation reserve program, which was set aside land, 40 million acres in the US since the 1987 Farm Bill. Soil carbon sequestration, both organic and inorganic, including practices such as biochar or any other system that add biomass carbon into the soil, creates a positive soil carbon budget, restores soil health rather than degrade soil health. So is there a one practice? No. There could be many practices, and those practices has to be site specific, adapted, fine-tuned in consideration of the biophysical and socioeconomic factors. Here's an example, my own experiments in 1971, exactly 50 years ago, done in Nigeria. This particular plot was pictured in 71. And previous crops of corn, the crop residue was left on the surface. The bean crop was planted after it. The bean here is cowpeas, not soybean. And these plots, some of them are 10, 15, 20% slope. And with this kind of crop residue and no plowing, there was no runoff and erosion, even on slope of 15%. So my objective was to make the system work to control erosion. And the crop residue retention was an important part of that. If the residue was not returned, as was the case in most farmers, they take away the residue. I had set up a plot in cooperation with my colleague from soil chemistry, just half a mile away. There we simulated taking away the residue as the farmers do for feeding cattle, building roofs, fences, whatever purpose. And then we try to put fertilizers to compensate for that. There is not possibility to do that. The plant in the foreground had the same rate of fertilizer, same variety, same date of planting as plot in the background, except for 15 years continuously, the crop residue was taken away. The soil is sterile. It has no organism because the organism have been starved. Soil is compacted. It has no biotic activity. Plant roots cannot grow. Virtually, it kills the soil. So biota is the engine of the soil health. If the soil biota is not healthy and we take away the food of that biota and we then try to compensate by chemical, it does not work. We try to find out if similar example could happen in Ohio. We had a long-term experiment on no-till farming at Coshocton, Ohio since 1970. In 2004, we established plans to take away the crop residue to see what can happen if we produce bioethanol from the crop residue. Josh Beniston, here photographed, he's a faculty member now somewhere in the West Coast. Um, his PhD thesis was this particular project. These two plots next to one another, 10 feet apart, one residue removed since 2004, picture taken in 2012, and one plot residue retained always, both of them under no-till farming. So if somebody asks what is a climate resilient soil, that is the one on the right. The crop residue retention increased not only moisture conservation, controlled erosion, but also improved activity of the organisms in the soil, especially earthworm. Soil was not compacted. So having a cover crop in an off season, then suppressing the cover crop physically or chemically or mechanically, or its life cycle analysis perspective, and growing other grain crops through it, having a leguminous cover crop. And the concept here is the philosophy is that it should be focused on CNPK rather than NPK. If you increase carbon input into the soil through crop residue retention, through cover cropping, and especially if the cover crop happens to be legume, then the dependence on the chemicals as a media of improving soil fertility becomes over time less and less. Maybe after a couple of decades of continuous farming with this kind of regenerative agriculture, you can completely do away with chemicals. And therefore, what is a model of a regenerative future agriculture system? A plant which obviously has a deep root system. Maybe the root system of plant has a suberin content, which is much higher, so it doesn't decompose, but a very prolific root system with associated mycorrhiza. And the plants which perhaps we can communicate through molecular based signal as the plant has any biotic or abiotic stress. Different signals are generated, which can be detected remote sensely, and therefore intervention can be made before serious damage happens to agronomic production. And in this system, if we can have always mulch cover and a cover crop planted with no-till farming, and we integrate the plants of grain crops with trees and livestock on a landscape level, eventually the soil organic matter content will increase. Soil will have high biodiversity, rhizobium and mycorrhiza and earthworms and termites and centipedes and millipedes and other organisms that weigh as much as 5 tons to a hectare. These soil become disease suppressive. They do not require then as much pesticide, eventually none at all perhaps, given sufficient optimum level of organic matter content. And if you do need additional nutrients and water, they should be applied directly to plant root when needed, so they are absorbed completely by the plants and they do not leak out into the environment. So this system, which involves the development of soil organic matter as a component of soil health, will create all the ecosystem services that the humanity and nature needs. Water resources, quality and quantity. It will minimize algal bloom and hypoxia. It will mitigate climate change through carbon sequestration, both adaptation as well as mitigation and stabilization. And it will improve food and nutritional security. The quality of the food produced will improve. It will, of course, improve soil biodiversity, both above and below ground. So in other words, soil organic matter is the heart of soil health and the ecosystem services, both for humanity and the nature, both humanity and nature. Don't forget the nature. And we have assessed that fertilizers, if they are not used properly, sometimes you may have to use them if the need for producing food requires more production, then additional fertilizer have to be applied if the soil does not have enough to supply. But please remember the nitrogen has a carbon footprint somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds per pound of nitrogen, or 1 and 2 kilogram per kilogram of nitrogen. Phosphorus fertilizer has less, potassium also has less, but nitrogen is very expensive in terms of carbon cost, hidden carbon cost in producing through Haber-Bosch process. So improving nitrogen efficiency, decreasing the losses is a very critical component. Herbicides are very carbon intensive, ranging from 2 to 12 kilogram of carbon per active ingredient of herbicide. Insecticides are also 1.0 to 8. So use of nitrogen fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide reduction by improving soil health is critical to reducing the environmental and carbon footprint of agricultural systems. Plowing is another thing. Moldboard plowing per hectare requires about 15 kilogram of carbon for diesel consumption, chiseling about 8, heavy disking about 8, standard disking about 6, subsoiling 11, cultivation 4, rotary hoeing 2. Therefore, if we eliminate these mechanical tillage operation, we save carbon. These are the farm operations that are based on diesel consumption. Similarly, weed control by chemicals, atrazine require more, and glyphosate and paraquat, they all require a lot of carbon. So minimizing the use, judicious use. If you need it, use it prudently. Remember, please, one distinction between poison and remedy. If you use a proper dose judiciously only as needed and when needed, it's a remedy. If you use indiscriminately, obviously everything is poison. Soil organic matter can also save nitrogen. A research done in Nebraska showed that each additional percent of organic matter in soil would save 31 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare. That's 31 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And in 2008, at a price of $1.48 or $1.48 per kilogram of nitrogen, that translates into $46.5 per hectare of saving. Divided by 2.5, and saving per acre, you can calculate. Similarly, some work done in Europe showed that increasing soil organic carbon from 0.5% to 1% could reduce nitrogen fertilizer input by 50%. 50%. So reducing the rate by improving soil health through organic matter content is very critical. Water saving in irrigated area. The last bullet shows compost can hold 20 times its weight in water. I don't know, but that's always true. In fact, right now, as we are speaking, I'm doing my lab experiment to see how much water retention can be increased by adding compost into the soil on weight per weight basis. But the fact is that water retention can be improved by returning the biomass on the soil surface as a mulch. Consequently, it does translate into better yield. I published this data that I'm sharing with you. So it's a kilogram per hectare, which is the same thing as in approximately pounds per acre. By increasing 1 ton of carbon per hectare as a humus in soil, can increase yield of corn by 100 to 300 kilogram per hectare, soybean 20 to 50, wheat 20 to 70, rice, sorghum, all crops. And yet you save the consumption of diesel and production of nutrients, which require carbon in that production, manufacture, application, and distribution. And we estimated that increasing carbon by 1 ton approximately increase between 40 and 100 kilogram per hectare, or 40 to 100 pounds per acre of any crop that you grow on these. And these benefits are especially very good if the soil is already eroded and degraded. I'm coming back to the policy issue now toward the end. And I'm very, very delighted to see the Growing Climate Solutions Act of 2020. 4 senators, Senator Brown, Senator Stabenow, Senator Graham, Senator Whitehouse, they all helped us put on the Senate floor a bill called Growing Climate Solutions Act in 2020. And these 2 statements are direct borrowing the language from the act as presented. The agriculture and forestry sector hold the potential to serve as a critical climate solution. I'm glad our Senate is addressing this. The second bullet, also borrowed from the document presented, at scale, agriculture and land use practices can sequester carbon at as low as $10 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent, making it the most cost-effective carbon sequestration method currently available. I am so delighted to see this statement, and hopefully it will come appear in the Farm Bill. At this cost of $120 to $130 per ton of carbon, and that the societal value of carbon, which translates to about 6 cents per pound or $35 per ton of CO2 sequestered, which is, by the way, very equal to the European 25 euro per ton of CO2 for trading. In the US, that trading never took off, never succeeded, although it did start. So if a farmer sequesters half a ton of carbon, the societal value that farmers should be compensated is about $65 per hectare, that $25, $26 per acre. For 1/3 ton of sequestration, $43 per hectare, about $17.50 per acre for payment through ecosystem services. That brings me to whether we need a farm bill that specifies Soil Health Act. We do have a Clean Air Act of 1967 by US EPA. We also have a Clean Water Act of 1972 by US EPA. We do not have a Healthy Soil Act. And I am hopeful that the Growing Climate Resolution Act of 2020 may lead eventually, with the support from the land managers and farmers and others. We need Soil Health Act, especially in relation to improving the environment, and therefore including as a part of that possibility of payment to farmers for ecosystem services for restoring the soil health.
Making agriculture a solution to environmental issues, such important words for our time. We're going to be joined now by PASA's Education Director, Franklin Egan. So everyone, please continue to add your questions to the Q&A. Franklin?
Our first question is from David, and he asks, what does it mean to create or maintain a buffer between humans and nature, for instance, as a means of heading off pandemics? He says, my understanding has been that most of human history has had no buffer between humans and nature, and that the modern idea of a buffer rather than sustainable interaction is the root of many of our environmental problems.
My philosophy has been that we should not have most of the land changed from natural to managed ecosystem. Right now, it's about 45%. I don't think it should exceed 50%. About 50% of the land should be kept under natural ecosystem for the wildlife, for good organism to thrive also. Take example, most of the antibiotics come from healthy soil. If the soils are contaminated, producing antibiotics may become very difficult. In fact, contaminated soils through use of antibiotics and returning manure back on the land has created some of those problems. So that's what I was thinking about, returning 50% of the land back to nature, so that buffer against, for example, sediment load, for example, transport of pollutants, for example, drought flood syndrome, for example, providing a home for all kind of organisms. That is the idea behind it.
So our next question, you were speaking about crop residue and other techniques. Do you find that the crop residue matters? A lot of research tends to be done with corn, but what about with diverse vegetable operations?
In some cases, we have set up experiments. This is actually a regional project. It involves 10 universities and USDA. We have been evaluating for the last several years. If you take away 25% of the residue, 50%, 75%, 100%, at what is the cutoff point at which there are negative impacts? So it depends on if the land is sloping and if the climate is moderate. If the climate is too cold, and the spring is too cold and too wet, leaving too much residue can have deleterious effect on the seedlings and crop growth. No question about that. You need warming and so forth. If the temperature and moisture conditions are favorable, perhaps 25–30% of the crop residue can be taken away. And in that case, soil will not be adversely affected. That depends on the local condition. But again, here, my concept is that let's try not to maximize the agronomic yield. Let's try to optimize it and sustain it over a longer period of time without jeopardizing the environment quality. Why produce more when 30–40% of what we produce never reaches any stomach, human or animal? That's a crime against nature. So let's use properly what we produce, and let's not maximize the production by dumping chemicals and other unnecessary inputs, which we can save.
I was really fascinated to hear about your contrast between the green revolution taking a seed focused perspective and now the need for a soil centric revolution. But kind of in that vein, we have a question here from Jeremy asking, to what extent do you think plant varieties might play a role in soil health? And for instance, is there going to be variety-wide variation in carbon sequestration and other soil building properties?
Absolutely. Plant varieties will always remain very important. There's no question about that. And certainly varieties which have deeper root systems, and probably even more straw. Remember, the green revolution varieties were dwarf varieties where the above ground residue was lesser and so-called harvest index was more. I'm hoping that we will have varieties which have more biomass, both below ground as well as above ground. So some sacrifice of the grain is possible. It has to be, because we are asking plants to do more. So there again, it's a trade-off. Yes, we need varieties which have better root systems. We need varieties which have probably more suberin content, especially in the roots, which doesn't decay very rapidly. But the focus is that it's not simply having improved varieties and take the soil part as a granted. It will take care of itself. That's the part which I'm trying to say. A variety which cannot produce miracle because soil health restrains it, the nutrient and water and microbes and other processes, if they don't exist in the soil, miracle varieties cannot perform their miracles. That's essentially what it is.
You mentioned that, at several points in your presentation that there's no one size fits solution and the tremendous amount of variation in different places. We have a question here from Ruth about in more dry and arid environments, what farmers can do to support soil carbon sequestration.
Cover crops, which we recommend quite a lot for humid climate. And in Africa, where I was working, Mucuna utilis, kudzu, Staloxanthis, Townsville Stalo, pigeon pea, Kazanus kazan, beans with very deep. They were all very useful. But in a semi-arid, arid climate with rainfall of lower, like we got in some parts, drier parts of the US, cover crop will consume of water and will compete and increase the drought. So their retention of the dead residue, the crop residue, leaving it on the surface rather than growing a cover crop, may be more critical. So we have to adapt, develop, adjust, fine-tune site-specific situation. And in dry climate, water is very critical. And we want to make sure that water conservation is key, because adding nutrients can only be effective. Even improved varieties can only be effective if there's more water in the root zone. And that's called green water supply. So somehow the blue water, rainwater, whenever it falls, should be stored, conserved in the root zone in place by reducing losses due to runoff, evaporation, other methods, by keeping the ground always covered and protected.
Yeah, sometimes it can be hard to wrap our heads around that in Pennsylvania, where more often than not our problem is too much water, at least too much water all at once.
Well, yeah, poorly drained soil. Ohio, 66% of the soils have to be drained, but that's too much water in spring. April, May. Come June, July at the silking, tasseling stage, the story is different. So here perhaps you could store water in a pond and then recycle back to the tiles through sub-irrigation. Uh, some way of preserving, conserving, storing water, and then recycling, rather than letting it run away, run off, cause a lot of problems. So again, it depends on the moisture condition, how to manage site-specific, judicious management. There is no one solution. Judicious management under site-specific condition, based on conserving, recycling, reusing, the basic principle.
So I have a question here from Sarah, who's asking you to elaborate a little bit more on the distinction between surface soil carbon and the making of humus. And she comments that she rarely hears the word humus at all anymore, and is wondering if the concept of polymer humus is out of date.
Technically, there has been some question, is there a humus? Is there a humic acid? Is there a fulvic acid? Are these concepts kind of artifacts of our methodology by which we determine? The humus is basically decayed organic matter. And the word humus, the Latin word, really meant based from homo human, so man. So humus is analogous to man. So is the word Adam. Adam is also man. Adam made from clay, like a potter makes. So those concepts are ingrained, embedded deep into our civilization. So they are very important. So from that point of view, I think humus and human go together. So we need humus in the soil. That's essentially what we are talking about. All culture, not only Christian, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, if you look at the commonality amongst them, all of them, this is it. How to protect Mother Earth, how to protect organic matter, the humus, the sense, elixir, Arabic word al-aksir, anglicized into elixir. Humus is the elixir of life. It's very essential. And we need about 4 to 5% of it. Half of it is carbon, organic carbon. So the surface root zone, whether it is above 12 inches or 20 inches, must have adequate amount of humus, 3, 4, 5%, or 1.5 to 2% of carbon. That is essential. It is that which will support the ecosystem services, many of them which come from soil health. No, whether I use that word or not, it's very important. It's embedded in the discussion. When I talk about soil carbon sequestration, that is exactly what I'm talking about.
So we have a question here from Lauren. Could you speak to the upper limit of soil carbon sequestration? A frequent challenge that she's seen is to the push for regeneration is the amount of carbon that soil can actually sequester before it fills up, so to speak.
Yeah, that is very correct. Soil has a limit, upper limit. This cup has a limit. And how much more water can I put into it? The one I have drank, that much. If I drink up to here, I can put that much. So which cup has a more capacity to put water? If I had drank all of it, then I have more capacity to put it back in it. The other possibility would be I can put a weld in another empty part on it, so expand its capacity. In soil, it's the same thing. Soil has a capacity. That capacity depends on the clay content, clay minerals, its depth, and its properties. So having said that, how much is the sink capacity? This soil has lower. So degraded soils, sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, Haiti, South Asia, because of the extractive farming capacity, we have drank more of it out. That's what plowing does. You burn up the crop residue, you release nutrients that are absorbed, and that is how the plants are grown. So eventually you depleted it. So that is, eventually the soil has a finite capacity. How much it is now, I published an article 3-4 years ago, 2018. I can send it PDF to you. for distribution, if you like. It's a published property. We estimated we lost 135 gigaton of carbon from agro ecosystems and degraded soil. So if you take all soils of the world, we have lost, and what we can put back, we estimated about 175 to 180 gigaton. Giga is billion, 90. And we estimated the maximum capacity on an annual basis in soil under ideal condition, which will never happen really, about 2.5 gigaton. So between now and 2100, 8 years from now, we can probably put 175, 180 gigaton of carbon back in soil. We can also put about 150 gigaton in the forest biomass, shrubs, and trees. Total sink capacity of the terrestrial biosphere, soil and trees is about 330, 340 gigaton, which we can fill back by the end of this century, which has a drawdown capacity of about 150, 160 parts per million of CO2. Can this capacity by itself mitigate global warming? No. Why no? Because we are burning this year even 11.5 gigaton. Soil can sequester at the most 2.5 gigaton. But if we find no carbon fuel sources, whatever that may be, wind, solar, geo, hydro, whatever you want to call it, it has no fossil carbon, and then implement terrestrial land-based solution, yes, we can keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. That requires policy intervention. And I hope it can be done.
You mentioned policy intervention, and you closed with this idea of a federal soil health act, which is really fascinating. Curious if you have some more thoughts on what public support would look like for regenerative agriculture, for sustainable farming, and what that soil health act might be.
Thank you. Well, let's take the case of no-till farming, conservation agriculture, which has 4 principles: no soil disturbance, returning the crop residue, complex crop rotation, integrated nutrient management, all those good things. We started doing this in Ohio in 1958. Even now, with all those extension and all those benefits, about 30%, 1/3 of the farmers do real no-till agriculture. Why are the others not doing it? Because there are risks involved. Sometimes slugs eat up the seedling. Sometimes soil is too wet. Sometimes soil is too cold. Sometimes seedling establishment was not very good. Sometimes the seed drill that needed cost $150,000 or $100,000 and they didn't have it. So it didn't plant very well. So farmers are taking risks in converting from one form of plow-based to no-till, which may have some risk of even lower yield. This is where Soil Health Act, if it is including the payment to farmer for ecosystem services, so that for initial 2, 3, 4 years when they do this transition, they are not taking any major risks, and society guarantees them that we will compensate you for taking those risks. That is where I think Soil Health Act can be very critical. Other part, it is not possible to have clean air and clean water unless you have healthy soil. Environment is a trinity of 3 elements: soil, water, air. We have left soil out of that trinity. It's about the time we consider that. So unless you have a healthy soil, the algal bloom issue, the anoxia issue, the water quality issue, the problem of eutrophication of water, they cannot be addressed completely. No way. This is the reason Soil Health Act is needed. And it is not anti-farmer. It's pro-farmer, it's pro-poor, it's pro-nature, it's pro-agriculture. It is just the time to do it.
Question from Lauren. So you mentioned cover crops, terminating cover crops with herbicide. You mentioned no-till agriculture as a key component here. She's curious where organic agriculture fits into your suite of soil-centric practices.
I mean, organic agriculture?
Yes, certified organic agriculture.
Certainly, it is one of the form of regenerative agriculture. Sometimes people think organic agriculture is the regenerative agriculture. I'm not sure I will go along with that, but organic agriculture certainly is a component, because remember I said, if you increase organic matter content, the chances that you will reduce nutrients and pesticides are lesser and lesser over time. And maybe a time will come that you don't need them at all because you have changed the system whole. So I think eventually this is definitely a very good option. My concern is this: right now we got 8 billion people, and we are destined to have about 10 billion in another 30 years, and probably 3.5 billion more by the end of the century. And everything is on the table because food is the most basic of all rights. That is number one priority. As an agronomist, as a soil scientist, as somebody who's interested in food security, I want to make sure that every person has a healthy and adequate amount of safe, nutritionally important diet. And therefore, under that condition, we do not want to put, thou shall never do this. The only thing I can say, thou shall make sure that every inhabitant of the planet Earth get adequate amount of nutritious food. That's the rule. Now, if the population trends so happen that rather than going up and up to 11.2 or 11.3 billion, the population can be decreased by education of the women and empowering women so they can have their own destiny in their own hand, and the population trend comes down, which many indications are that it may, and we come down rather than 11 billion to 6 billion or 5 billion, by all means, agriculture may be the only way to do it. But at this stage, when population is going up and the food habits are changing with changing affluent population, I don't want to put a restriction on thou shall not do this. We must make sure, and we are not talking just about the North America or Western Europe. We are talking about the global community, the people where their population density is very high, soils are also degraded, and only 700 million people are hungry, but more than 2 billion are malnourished. And that malnourished comes from degradation of the soil, which does not have all the 17 micronutrients required for healthy food. That's where they come from. Until that soil restoration happens, that it produces healthy food, let's be very careful. But yes, organic agriculture is certainly a very important component. Very important.
Thank you. So here's I think maybe a technical science question from Ashley. How do you go about measuring the carbon loss from tillage and herbicide use? And how is herbicide use using carbon?
Well, they are produced, nitrogen, for example, is produced by the Haber-Bosch process. Now, Haber-Bosch are both German scientists, and they were trying to develop actually explosive. As many of you know, ammonium nitrate, unfortunately, somebody used in Oklahoma 20 or so plus years ago. So this is the energy required to change inert nitrogen from the atmosphere to reactive nitrogen into ammonia or nitrate form. Similarly, herbicides based on fossil fuel energy are also the same way. How much is the fossil energy required to produce them? So if you can use solar energy or hydro or another, then some of those factors that I gave you become redundant and irrelevant. But they were based on the assumption that all the energy is coming from fossil fuel consumption to produce, to package, to distribute them. Those figures were not based for application of them. Application by sprayers or injectors, that's an additional cost of carbon.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lal. This has been a really interesting conversation, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and very extensive experience on this important topic.
Bye-bye.